Right. Yeah. I've just started a new one already. Okay. Maybe that. Maybe that. Hey. Oh, some people have all started coming now to this one. Just tell him I've started a new one. Can you just go and tell him? Sorry, I would have. Most people have started. Hi, everybody. Sorry about that. No idea what happened. Just have to try and get most people back. Could somebody think quickly on Facebook? I've already put something, but some people might not see that. That would be really helpful for me if you can easily do that whilst I'm trying to juggle about 4 things at once. Great. Well done, everybody. I'll just try and make it up to about the same numbers that we had at the beginning because I kind of could see how many that is. So, was it obvious how to get back on again to the new one? I can't tell from here. A few people sure at the moment. I haven't answered my question about boundary pushers or conformists. You still have a moment to do that whilst everybody else finds out where we are. Just going to see. Can somebody just answer me that was it easy to get back onto this again question, please? Ah, brilliant. Right, how are we doing? Lots of fiddling and it suddenly had to update page. Right, yeah, depends on your settings, doesn't it? We'll get there eventually, don't worry. Sorry, I'm just trying to sort something out here. Ah, dear. Right, I think most people are nearly here now. If anyone wants to message anybody that they think's struggling, I can't see Evelyn anymore, and I can't see Barry and Lydia either. So I don't know if anyone wants to text them or call them just so they can check. I've lost Sue Lovett as well. This is the first time we've had this issue, isn't it? I feel like these numbers Bible studies are going to be like one of those time lapse videos, and the most obvious thing is going to be the length of my hair. I feel like I don't know if any of you remember that cartoon, Captain Caveman. I feel like I might be like that by the end of this lockdown period, and we can just measure it each week. Maybe some of the others of you will be like that as well. By that stage, we won't be able to see each other at all, so it'll be all right. So, rebels or conformists, boundary pushers or conformists. I'm really hoping that the other people that were on, like Evelyn and Sue and Barry and Lydia, get back again. Sue's back. Well done. So it just came up on the top of my screen with saying that YouTube had a copyright issue with a soundtrack or a video. And given that we have neither of those two things, I'm not quite exactly sure what on earth that was about, but it was completely outside of our control, and so that's what happened, and it just stopped and we had to start again. So I guess we'll learn that for the next time. So right, we will get started. So some of you have owned up and said that you are boundary pushers, and some of you have said that you're conformists, and I guess there's something about being a bit of a rebel that's kind of can be quite appealing, going against the grain, going against tradition, and sometimes it's the cool person, isn't it? It's the cool kid in the school, the rebel. I don't know who your icon might have been when you were younger, but often it's the rebel character who's the cool one, and sometimes the rebel is the heroic one as well, aren't they? They're, you know, your Martin Luther and the Reformation, and you know, not everyone went around banging things into doors, but Martin Luther did, because he had that kind of pushing the boundaries streak, and he saw things differently. And or maybe it's like Rosa Parks on the bus suddenly just going, you know what, I'm not doing that. We're not staying like this anymore. I'm going to take a stand. So we kind of see that, don't we? That heroic thing, and some of these people are symbols of righteous rebellion, and sometimes justice demands that there's a bit of grit, a bit of pushing the boundaries, a bit of rebelliousness. However, and welcome back those of you that are coming back. I still feel there's a couple of people. It's Evelyn and Barry and Lydia that I'm worrying about, because I can't see them. So I don't know if anyone can help them. But of course, being a rebel is sometimes exactly what you don't want to be, isn't it? And in this story we're about to read together, it's definitely where you didn't want to be, because the ground opens up and fire consumes you, and it's not cool, and it's not heroic, and it's not desirable. And it's something to run away from and to avoid. And these kind of rebels make the wrong kind of history, and they stand as examples of what we shouldn't do rather than what we should do. So we're going to read together. Yay, Evelyn. Hello, Peter and Ella as well. I'm sorry it was a YouTube thing. It had nothing to do with me. For once in my life, the technology going wrong wasn't to do with me. So welcome back. You haven't missed much. We're going to read together from number 16. It's quite a long story, but I think it would be good for us to read it. I'll try and read it reasonably speedily. So, Korah, son of Izhar, the son of Kohath, the son of Levi, and certain Reubenites, Dathan and Abiram, sons of Eliab, and On, son of Peleth, became insolent and rose up against Moses. With them were 250 Israelite men, well-known community leaders who had been appointed members of the council. They came as a group to oppose Moses and Aaron and said to them, "You've gone too far. The whole community is holy, every one of them, and the Lord is with them. Why then do you set yourselves above the Lord's assembly?" When Moses heard this, he fell face down. Then he said to Korah and all his followers, "In the morning the Lord will show who belongs to him and who is holy, and he will make that person come near him. The man he chooses, he will cause to come near him. You, Korah, and all of your followers are to do this. Take censers, and tomorrow put fire and incense in them before the Lord. The man the Lord chooses will be the one who is holy. You Levites have gone too far." Moses also said to Korah, "Now listen, you Levites, isn't it enough for you that the God of Israel has separated you from the rest of the Israelite community and brought you near himself to do the work at the Lord's tabernacle and to stand before the community and minister to them? He has brought you and all your fellow Levites near himself, but now you are trying to get the priesthood too. It is against the Lord that you and all your followers have banded together. Who is Aaron that you should grumble against him?" Then Moses summoned Dathan and Abiram, the sons of Eliab, but they said, "We will not come. Isn't it enough that you've brought us up out of a land flowing with milk and honey to kill us in the desert, and now you also want to lord it over us? Moreover, you haven't brought us into a land flowing with milk and honey, or given us an inheritance of fields and vineyards. Will you gouge out the eyes of these men? No, we will not come." Then Moses became very angry and said to the Lord, "Do not accept their offering. I have not taken so much as a donkey from them, nor have I wronged any of them." Moses said to Korah, "You and all your followers are to appear before the Lord tomorrow, you and they and Aaron. Each man is to take his censer and put incense in it, 250 censers in all, and present it before the Lord. You and Aaron are to present your censers also." So each man took his censer, put fire and incense in it, and stood with Moses and Aaron at the entrance to the tent of meeting. When Korah had gathered all his followers in opposition to them at the entrance of the tent of meeting, the glory of the Lord appeared to the entire assembly. The Lord said to Moses and Aaron, "Separate yourselves from this assembly so that I can put an end to them at once." But Moses and Aaron fell face down and cried out, "O God, God of the spirits of all mankind, will you be angry with the entire assembly when only one man sins?" Then the Lord said to Moses, "Say to the assembly, move away from the tents of Korah, Dathan, and Abiram." Moses got up and went to Dathan and Abiram, and the elders of Israel followed him. He warned the assembly, "Move back from the tents of these wicked men. Do not touch anything belonging to them, or you will be swept away because of their sins." So they moved away from the tents of Korah, Dathan, and Abiram. Dathan and Abiram had come out and were standing with their wives, children, and little ones at the entrance to their tents. Then Moses said, "This is how you will know that the Lord has sent me to do all these things, and that it was not my idea. If these men die a natural death and experience only what usually happens to men, then the Lord has not sent me. But if the Lord brings about something totally new, and the earth opens its mouth and swallows them with everything that belongs to them, and they go down alive into the grave, then you will know that these men have treated the Lord with contempt." As soon as he finished saying all this, the ground under them split apart, and the earth opened its mouth and swallowed them with their households, and all Korah's men and all their possessions. They went down alive into the grave with everything they owned. The earth closed over them, and they perished and were gone from the community. At their cries, all the Israelites around them fled, shouting, "The earth is going to swallow us too." And fire came out from the Lord and consumed the 250 men who were offering the incense. The Lord said to Moses, "Tell Eleazar, son of Aaron the priest, to take the censers out of the smouldering remains and scatter the coal some distance away, for the censers are holy. The censers are the men who sinned at the cost of their lives. Hammer the censers into sheets to overlay the altar, for they were presented before the Lord and have become holy. Let them be a sign to the Israelites." Well, we'll stop there. Well, that was cheery, wasn't it? That's going to make you feel a whole lot better on this Thursday evening that we're looking at this passage together. So we've been saying, are we more of a boundary pusher, or are we more of a conformist? And some of you have been honest about that, and some of you haven't, which is a shame, really, because I was thinking that I might take a screenshot of what you'd said, and then I would know who to look out for at the next church meeting, wouldn't I? So maybe it's wise that you haven't told me. Welcome to Marilyn, Simon as well, and all those who've snuck back in. It's just Barry and Lydia, I think, that I can't see, but maybe they're hiding in the background somewhere. So we're going to be talking about Korah primarily in this passage, and he had two problems really that we are going to look at together. The first one was that he rejected God's appointed leaders, and the second was that he tried to approach God on his own terms. Brilliant. Lydia and Barry are back. This is the full quota now. We can keep going. So the first thing that we see here is that these rebels, Korah and Dathan and Abiram, and on, they became insolent. It's slightly concerning that actually my favourite perfume is called Insolence. I don't feel that that's maybe the best thing for me to have, but insolent is such a great word, isn't it? You just feel all over them the kind of attitude that they had as they started thinking about Moses and his leadership. And when we look at the history of the church, and even the problems that a lot of churches still face now, you would think that most of the enemies that pastors and mission personnel or churches would face would actually be from outside of their congregation. But Numbers 16 tells us that often that's not the case. The biggest enemies often come, sadly, from within, from people who profess to love God, and yet something happens and suddenly we're willing to throw darts or spears at people in leadership. And it's the devil's masterstroke, isn't it? All the while that we fight within, he doesn't need to do anything much at all. And I can't remember quite who said it. I've got a few options in my head. I'm not sure which one, but somebody said it a good while back now that the church is dying from self-inflicted wounds. The church is dying from self-inflicted wounds. And sadly, that's what we see happen, isn't it? That churches start fighting within themselves, and you get different groups of people with different opinions, and that becomes a negative thing. It doesn't always have to be a negative thing, but it becomes a negative thing. And the truth is, I'm sure that a few people start out with that plan. Few people think to themselves, oh, I'm going to join a church and I'm going to be as awkward as I possibly can be, and I'm going to make things difficult for other people here, and I'm going to criticize and become resentful and rebellious. I'm sure most people don't plan to be like that. It's something that easily can happen, and we know that easily can happen because we see it through the history of the church. So how do we become those people? How do we become one of these people who joins up with Korah and all these other people whose names we don't use anymore? Well, I think one of the things, and we've seen this in other places, I'm sure we'll see it again, is that these rebels are forgetful. When we look at the first few verses here, they are forgetful. We've got Korah and his ringleaders, and then there's 250 men from Israel. And they come to Moses and to Aaron, and they're just not happy, are they? But they've just kind of forgotten what position they already have. First of all, it tells us that Korah, the son of Ishar, the son of Kohath, the son of Levi. Right. So those of you that were with me back in week 1, we learned that the Levites had a special place looking after the Ark of the Covenant. So they already had a really special place. You know, if there's a hierarchy here with Moses at the top and then Aaron and his guys there, then they're next in line. But he's forgotten that. He's just like, well, I don't like this. And then Reuben as well, the other guys, Dathan and Abiram and On, they were from the tribe of Reuben. Now, they were pretty high up the pecking order as well, but you might remember that they were deposed from being the number 1 tribe by the tribe of Judah. So, you know, maybe there's dissatisfactions that have already started to be in their hearts and niggle away at them. And instead of focusing on the good things, maybe they're finding themselves camped on the south side of the tabernacle. Perhaps they kind of get together at night. You know, we need to remember that they didn't have social distancing back then. Perhaps they gather around the campfire together at night and they start to chat. And, you know, the Reubenites are going, oh, well, you know, it's really unfair, isn't it? It's really unfair that the tribe of Judah took our place. And the Levites are going, yeah, and it's pretty unreasonable, actually, that, you know, we just have to be on the outside of the tabernacle. You know, why couldn't we be chosen to be on the inside? It's really unfair, isn't it? And, you know, this is how these things start, isn't it? We start to chat about things, and we allow this kind of root of bitterness to get within our hearts, and we get forgetful about the things that God has done. And so they come to Moses in verse 3, and they're pretty straightforward about it. You've gone too far. And then they throw this at him. The whole community is holy, every one of them, and the Lord is with them. Why then do you set yourselves above the Lord's assembly? And then again in verse 13, we have a similar, where is it? I put 13. Oh yeah, here we go. Isn't it enough that you have brought us up out of the land flowing with milk and honey to kill us in the desert? And now you also want to lord it over us. And they just come to Moses and they say, who do you think you are? Who do you think you are? And they appeal to this kind of sense of fairness and democratic equality. We're all the same, aren't we? We're all holy, aren't we? And then they take that the stage further and they say, well, you obviously think that you're more holy than we are. But they've forgotten, haven't they? They've forgotten God's call to Moses. And Moses was far from enthusiastic, wasn't he, about this position? He tried desperately to get out of this position. He kept saying to God, I can't do this. I don't want to do this. Get someone else to do it. And even in these chapters we've looked at together, there have been a couple of occasions where Moses said, I don't want to do this anymore. Can't you get someone else to do it? So they're accusing him of being on some kind of power trip or being self-appointed, but actually it's far from the truth. Moses is completely called by God for this role, and he didn't really want to be called by God, but God has called him and put him in this, truthfully unenviable position, isn't it? Leading 2 million former slaves across the wilderness into a new country. I mean, I don't think that's, what he was desperate to do at all, but God has called him. And I think, that's kind of an important thing for us to remember. And I don't normally speak about the strengths of our denomination or anybody else's denomination for that matter, but I think in this particular issue, it can be really quite a good thing, because when people are appointed, and I appreciate this is just one form of leadership, but when they're appointed to a church leadership, it's a mixture of things that happen. It's a sense of internal call that God has got his hand on you and he's calling you to some kind of purpose, whether that's a pastoral purpose or a diaconate purpose or, like a small group leader or whatever. There's a sense within yourself that God has got you ready for this opportunity and that he is calling you. One of our former regional ministers in Yorkshire, Ernie Wally, who's a great guy, he used to talk about this persistent sense of oughtness, which I feel is a really good Yorkshire kind of phrase as well. A persistent sense of oughtness. There's something in you that just won't go away, and you keep trying to put it on the back burner or make it go away or bury it, and it just won't go away. So that's something of that internal sense of God's calling. But there's also the other part of the equation, which is an external what's the word? Validation. That's the word. External validation of what you feel. So it's not just somebody standing up and cheering out, I feel called. There's a lot of process to go through, and lots of people speak to you and interview you and assess you and say, yeah, actually we agree. And that's what happens with our deacons, isn't it, as well, is that there's a sense of people being willing to put themselves forward for a role, but actually beyond that, the church meeting says, actually, yes, we agree with this sense of call that you have, and that's really important. I think that we have both of those two sides of the equation there. Anyway, I digress. Sometimes there's going to be tough times, and actually knowing that God has called you to be the leader for that time is really important. And leaders are not perfect. We see that with all the leaders that are in the Bible. Leaders are not perfect. Leaders don't always do what we want them to do. Leaders make mistakes. Leaders can be annoying and irritating, and they can have bad days and get out of bed the wrong side and all of those kind of things. This is not saying this is a perfect scenario. This is a human scenario, but there's something of the calling of God in that. And God, and we see it particularly in these stories around the Exodus, but God doesn't take kindly to people's harsh criticism and judgments against those that he's called to a position for his purposes. And we see here there's Korah, but there's also these other guys from the tribe of Reuben. In verse 14, they're very forgetful as well. You haven't brought us into a land flowing with milk and honey. You haven't given us an inheritance of fields and vineyards. And then this random phrase, will you gouge out the eyes of these men? I'm not quite sure why he says it. No, we will not come. Then Moses became very angry and said to the Lord, do not accept their offering. I have not taken so much as a donkey from them, nor have I wronged any of them. They refuse to go to Moses when he summons them because he hasn't taken them to the promised land. Now, do you remember last week we were looking at Numbers 13 and 14, and they went to spy out the promised land. And what was the reason that they weren't in the promised land? I don't recall that it had anything to do with Moses. It had everything to do with the people's unwillingness and unbelief. Yeah. So suddenly they've forgotten that it was all about them, that they didn't trust the spies who'd gone to scout out the land. They didn't trust Moses. They didn't trust God. They didn't want to go into the promised land because it's too scary. But now it's all Moses' fault. He hasn't taken them into the promised land. I wonder how many of you in your house, some of you this won't necessarily relate to just right now, but I'm sure it might have done at some point. And you're walking down the hall and you turn to go up the stairs and you trip over something that has been left on the stairs. And your immediate thought at that point is, who's left this here? You can see this occurs quite often in our house. Who's left this on the stairs for me to trip over? And then there's that dreadful moment when you suddenly realise that actually you left it on the stairs yourself. You know, it's one of those moments, isn't it? They're so quick to blame other people. And we can be so like that as well, can't we? When things don't go quite the way that we'd like them to. And it's so easy. It's so easy to blame other people. It's so easy to look for someone else to criticise or judge. And it's so easy to forget our part in the problem. And more often we are at least part of the problem. And the question we should always be asking is, how can we be part of the solution? Rather than how can they be part of the solution? How can we be part of the solution? And so forgetfulness is a huge issue for these guys. They've just forgotten the good things that's already God has done for them. And they just rising up against Moses. But the second part of this, and some ways more the heart bit of it, is that rebels are prone to jealousy. These guys are prone to jealousy, aren't they? And again, it can be really easy for us to complain when we want somebody else's spot in the limelight. And if we're caught up in a sense of constantly wanting to be where someone else is, then we can miss the beauty of our own unique calling and where God has put us now. And where he's put us now may not be where we are forever, but it is where he's put us now. And if we're consumed with jealousy for someone else's place, then we can't appreciate our own. And in verses 9 and 10, Moses tries to remind them of that. He says, isn't it enough for you that the God of Israel has separated you from the rest of the Israelite community and brought you near himself to do the work at the Lord's tabernacle and to stand before the community and minister to them? He has brought you and all your fellow Levites near himself, but now you're trying to get the priesthood too? It's like he really lays it on there, doesn't he? Just saying, you know, Korah, remember this special position that you have. You've been separated from the rest of the Israelite community. Most important of all, you've been brought near to God. You know, in this time, you just couldn't just randomly go to the tabernacle when you felt like it. You had to be one of the Levites to do that. And he was able to do that, to do the work at the Lord's tabernacle, to stand before the community and minister to them. I mean, they were just so privileged. And Moses tries to remind Korah of that. He was a Levite, he was a Kohathite, and he had this special position. He got to wrap up the table of the presence and the Ark of the Covenant itself. He got to be inside. He played a crucial part, but he wants more. I don't know if you knew, but Korah was actually Moses and Aaron's cousin. Maybe there's something in that. Do you remember last week? We never quite got to the bottom of this, but it was Aaron and Miriam who were complaining against Moses, his own brother and sister, and now it's his cousin. Maybe there was an issue with that. He was close. He was so close to being right in the center, but he wasn't quite in the center. And maybe that just got to him, and he allowed it to get to him. And he wanted to have more. He wanted equality with a high priest. And that was rooted in envy and jealousy. And they're really strong emotions, aren't they? I'm sure that if you were completely honest on the chat, which I'm not really expecting you to be, you would say that there were times when you have let those things get a grip on you. Because it just happens, doesn't it? And, we want to be that person who leads worship or plays the piano or gets invited to make scones for the afternoon tea. Because there's something within us that is like that, and it's part of our human nature. And so at times we wrestle with that and making sure that actually we allow God to deal with that in us. And because as a result of envy, we can miss out on the joy of our own task. If we're constantly looking over to somewhere else, wishing that we were there, then we can't be happy in where we are right now, can we? Maybe that's about our family circumstances or the way things have worked out or our job situation. It's not all about the church, is it? There's lots of places where we can keep looking over to someone else's position and thinking, if only I was like that. And that's one step. And the next step is I wish that I was like that. And then the next step is I wish they weren't like it and I wish it was me instead. And that some little steps that we take that allow that envy and jealousy to take over in our heart. And then we stop being joyful in what God has given us. And we cease to remember that he knows what is best for us. Yeah. So I'm trying to read my writing. It's really, really difficult. So they bring these words and Moses is really angry. To be fair, I'm kind of quite sympathetic to that, to be honest. He says, don't accept their offering. I haven't taken even a donkey from them. And I haven't wronged any of them. It's horrible being accused of things you haven't done, isn't it? And I think most of us want to fight back at that point. And yeah, he becomes angry with their words of criticism against him. But then there's this kind of theme underneath all this kind of forgetfulness and the jealousy. And it's this, that these guys are trying to approach God on their own terms, aren't they? They want to decide what the rules of engagement are. They're not happy with the ones that God has given through Moses. And the results for them are devastating, aren't they? And the issue here is about the role of the priesthood in this context. Only Aaron and his sons were allowed to be the high priests, and they were called to give their entire lives to the ministry of the tabernacle, to administer the sacrifices. And even when they went in, there was huge amount of regulations, ways that they had to behave, things that they had to wear, and they had to go with reverence and fear. And I don't remember back in Numbers chapter 3 and verse 10. Says, appoint Aaron and his sons to serve as priests. Anyone else who approaches the sanctuary must be put to death. And it says it again in verse 38. And in fact, that is what happened to Nadab and Abihu. They fell dead because they made an offering of unauthorized fire before the Lord. So, even those who were permitted to go into the most holy place had to do it with much caution and with the appropriate awe and reverence for the holiness of God. And Korah and his friends are not eager to enter the promised land. They're too scared. They're too scared to face tall people, but they're very eager to enter the holy place. They want access to God on their own terms. And Moses' response, I think, is almost like a desperate kind of prayer, isn't it? Verse 4, when Moses heard this, our first criticism, he fell face down. Maybe he was just a bit overwhelmed by what they were saying. Maybe he just felt completely desperate. I don't know what to say to these guys. Surely we've gone through enough already. I think it was like a fall face down before God. Maybe he felt that God might slay them immediately for what they'd said. But there's a sense of prayer there. And he comes back to them with this quite strange request from our point of view in verses 6 and 7 and says, you need to bring your censers and incense before God. We're all going to offer them to the Lord. That includes Aaron and his sons, and the Lord will show you who is set apart. The Lord will show you. I mean, it really feels like these guys should have known better. At that point, they should have known better. As I said, we just read that in Numbers 3, and also in Leviticus, it says that Nadab and Abihu offered fire to God, but they did it wrong and they were consumed by fire. And now Moses is saying, look, you're going to bring your censers and your incense and your fire, and God will decide. Personally, probably because of the kind of person I am, I probably would have taken the path of least resistance at that point, and just thought, it's not worth the risk, actually. Maybe I'll just apologize and move away from the fire. And they should have known that, shouldn't they? They should have known that it was a bad idea. They should have been able to see that this wasn't something that they would want to sign up for. And so Korah and his friends and families, and they came to God, and in the second part of the story that we read there. And actually, there's this amazing moment when God says to Moses and Aaron, separate yourselves from the assembly so that I can put an end to them at once. And Moses and Aaron, they fall face down again and they cry out to God and they say, are you going to be angry with everyone because of one person's sin? Even though these guys have criticized them and judged them and been jealous towards them, Moses and Aaron still say, no, God, don't do this. Don't do this. They're still interceding on the part of the people, even those who've hurt them. And so God, as we see many times in the Old Testament, actually somewhat relents and says, okay, move away from the tents of Korah, Dathan and Abiram, the ringleaders. Your choice. These guys are guilty, but the rest of you can move away. And so they warned everyone. They said, don't touch anything. Just move away from their tents. And then it's, this is the extreme vote of confidence or no confidence, isn't it? This is how you'll know that the Lord has sent me to do all these things. And it was not my idea. I just feel like Moses must have been there. I don't know if he was stamping his feet or stamping his staff, but it's like, he wants to say, how long will you realize that this is the last thing on earth that I would have signed up for? It wasn't my idea that I'm doing this, so don't get cross with me. You're choosing the wrong person. And he just says, well, just watch and see what God is going to do. And it's just, it's awful, isn't it? It is just awful, isn't it? Because as soon as he finished speaking, the ground split apart, the earth opened up, it swallowed them and all their household and everything, and then fire came out on these 250 men who were offering incense. And God appoints one of Aaron's sons, and he says, go and pick up all the metal censers and hammer them down into a covering and put that over the tabernacle, so that, over the altar, so that it will be a sign to people of the danger of approaching God through someone else other than his appointed representative. And it's the challenge, isn't it, that we can only approach God on his terms. And I'm sure that many of you have had the conversations with people that have gone along the lines of, well, all religions are the same, aren't they? And they're all just roads going up the mountain. Well, yeah, it's just not the same mountain, is it? And there's so much complexity in that, isn't there? And I think in some ways it used to be an easier conversation because we didn't live with so many people from around the world as our next door neighbours, and so many devoted followers of other faiths who we live near, work with, are friends with. And so some of our simplistic answers don't work so well anymore, which is a good thing, by the way, because I think we need to give people dignity and value and respect. But there is something really important about the fact that we can only come to God on his terms, and we can only ever come to him through his appointed high priest. And Hebrews is really brilliant at helping us to understand the Old Testament in the light of Jesus. And Hebrews chapter 2 and verse, we'll do 14. He says, since the children have flesh and blood, he too shared in their humanity, Jesus, so that by his death he might destroy him who holds the power of death, that is the devil, and free those who all their lives were held in slavery by their fear of death. For surely it's not angels he helps, but Abraham's descendants. For this reason, he had to be made like his brothers in every way, in order that he might become a merciful and faithful high priest in service to God, and that he might make atonement for the sins of the people. Because he himself suffered when he was tempted, he is able to help those who are being tempted. And then chapter 4 as well, verse 14. Therefore, since we have a great high priest who has gone through the heavens, Jesus, the Son of God, let us hold firmly to the faith we profess. For we do not have a high priest who is unable to sympathize with our weaknesses, but we have one who has been tempted in every way, just as we are, yet was without sin. Let us then approach the throne of grace with confidence, so that we may receive mercy and find grace to help us in our time of need. Every high priest is selected from among men as appointed to represent them in matters related to God, to offer gifts and sacrifices for sins. He is able to deal gently with those who are ignorant and are going astray, since he himself is subject to weakness. This is why he has to offer sacrifices for his own sins as well as for the sins of the people. No one takes this honor upon himself. He must be called by God, just as Aaron was. So Christ also did not take upon himself the glory of becoming a high priest. And then it goes on. And so we come to God through Jesus, our high priest. That's the way. That's God's terms. It's because he's died and taken our sin. He was the perfect sacrifice and the perfect high priest. And what happened to Jesus was that he was swallowed up into the ground for 3 days. And he took on himself all of God's wrath for our rebellion. And so our scary, dangerous, holy God, because of Jesus, looks at us tenderly, and our Father in heaven welcomes us with open arms and unconditional love. And when we read these stories in the Old Testament, and it was a bit true with Elijah and the prophets of Baal as well on Sunday, wasn't it? It's very bloodthirsty and brutal and physical, and appalling to us, actually. But it says something to us about the holiness of God and the way that we need to come to him. And in the New Testament, we look at things a little differently, and we see spiritual realities, but maybe it would be easy for us if we kind of actually thought everyone was going to be swallowed up and consumed by fire. But because we don't see that so much anymore, it's easier for us to forget that people don't know Jesus and are not coming to know God as their Father through him. And that's the only way. And just really a reminder for us to keep praying for those who don't yet know him, to pray for particularly Muslims at this time of Ramadan, because there's so many stories that come out of the Muslim world of the way that Jesus reveals himself in dreams and visions, and particularly during Ramadan, when those who are devoted followers of Islam are seeking after God. And so we need to pray that God reveals himself to them in Jesus, don't we? And so that they come to know him as Saviour and Lord. So I just kind of encourage you to do that at the end of this evening, really. So thank you for bearing with us tonight with the tech. I'm amazed it's the first time it's gone wrong, really. I hope you feel not too depressed at the end of this story. We are going to have a week off next week. It's half term for some people, and the team have been working unbelievably hard this last 8-9 weeks, and obviously before that as well. And so we're going to try and have a bit of a quieter week next week without any extra things. So there'll be a Sunday morning service, but without all the extra things in the week, just to allow everyone to have a bit of a break and a space. So we'll come back to numbers. I can't promise it'll be more cheery, but it might be. Not next week, but the week after that. So thank you, everybody. Stay well. We'll see you Sunday morning for the next part of Elijah's story. And we have as our special guest Patrick Reagan, who is the CEO of Kintsugi Hope, which deals with all sorts of things to do with wellbeing and mental health. So that'll be a really, really good interview on Sunday morning. Thank you, everyone. I've got 21 WhatsApp messages whilst we've been chatting, by the way. This is my life. You know what? It's even nice to see your names on the screen. It will be nicer to see it in real soon in some capacity.